Hello everybody. So my name is Patrick Chanezon. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I've been at Google for 5 years. I'm based in San Francisco. I've been doing lots of different stuff at Google. I started with AdWords and then Google Checkout. And a few years ago, I was in charge of OpenSocial, which is quite relevant for today's theme. And then I did HTML5, and these days I'm more focused on cloud computing. So the talk today is about the social web and how it evolved and what are the current technologies and standards that are used for building social apps. So again, there's a mobile agenda that you can find there, where you can see the list of sessions and rate the sessions and all that. So I have a huge slide deck for today. I'm going to skip through lots of the sections because there's lots of ground to cover. I will post my slides online, so feel them more like as references than anything else, and you can find them on the web. The big news for today is what was announced in the keynote this morning, which is the release of a Jumb for OAuth. So I'll dedicate some time at the end about that. I think that's the most important news. So I'm going to explain what is social, a little bit of history about social software, the list of Google's social products, and then we'll go over all the standards and technologies, the open standards and technologies that are used in social software. I'll talk a little bit about the Buzz API, and then we'll talk about monetization. So, but first, I'd like to know a little bit about your interests. So, who among you is developing social apps today? Okay, quite a few. That's good. How many are doing that on OAuth? Hey, great. How many have used the Buzz API? Wow. Okay. And then how many are building apps for Facebook? Wow, pretty impressive. Great. Okay, so what is social? Like some of you may have seen these slides already from a few years ago when I went to Brazil and talked about OpenSocial, maybe last year. I like this because it's a good reminder of what social is about. To me, social is a horizontal layer for the web to just bring on the web a lot of the social activities we have in real life. But because there are many definitions of what social means, I just find it useful to go back to kids to see what their point of view is. So I asked my daughter Elliot what social means to her, and she's a very good drawer. So she gave me some drawings. We look at each other, lots of looking at pictures and all that. We're talking, communication is an important theme, laughing, like all the fun apps and games and all that. We help each other. Collaboration is a big theme for social apps. We read together, like sharing links and reading lists and all that. And then collaboration again, projects together. So that's kind of what social is in real life. And what's been happening in the past 3 years, I would say, is that all these activities, thanks to social APIs from social networks, have moved to the web. We're in the process of moving all these in the forms of applications using social APIs. A bit of history about social networking. And when I say history, I'm talking about recent history, and more about the history of APIs. How can you leverage social networking in your apps? So in 2007, it was all of the rage about building social apps inside of the social network. So you had the Facebook platform on one side that allowed you to take a smaller version of your site and build it inside of Facebook, and then you could use their API there and have access to the social graph of users. Same thing for on the other side, on the open side, I would say, there was OpenSocial, which allowed you to do the same thing for OAuth, MySpace, and all the other networks in the world, pretty much except Facebook. So you had Facebook platform and OpenSocial. That was 2007. Then 2008. In 2008, we saw a generalization of social networking where a lot more people started using social networks, and at that time, the social network APIs themselves starting to go out. Instead of requiring developers to build this smaller version of their site inside of the social network environment, they started to provide APIs like Facebook Connect or Google Friend Connect that allowed a regular website with just a few snippets of JavaScript or backend calls to just pull the social graph from the site. So you're on Huffington Post or Time.com, you log in with either your OAuth login or your Facebook login, and then you get access to, and then the site get access to your social graph, and they can do some personalization with that. So that was 2008. At the API level, and when I say at the API level, at the open standard API level, the standards we're talking about were OpenID, OAuth, and OpenSocial again. Twitter Anywhere is part of that move as well, and the Facebook Open Graph API is part of that. Now, 2009, there's been a shift in 2009 where it's not only about the social graph. People, and not only people, but social networks themselves realized that the most important aspect of social networking for users was not only playing with apps inside of the social networks. It was all about the update, what we call the activity stream, seeing the feed of update from your friends. And so in 2009, and Twitter is really the company that kind of created that, not the idea, but made it work a lot, and all their growth was linked to the activity stream. And basically, after Twitter became popular, Facebook redesigned their page to focus it around the activity stream. If you've tried the new OAuth, you see that the activity stream is pretty central there as well. Google Buzz is all about the activity stream. So all the social networking companies kind of took notice of that switch, and the whole focus in social networking switched to activity streams. So at the API level and at the open standards level, what that meant is that there's been a bunch of standards defined in this area, one called activity streams, another called Salman about commands on websites, PubSubHub, and WebFinger. We'll talk about these in the session. And then 2010, the activity stream is still very strong. But then what is strong as well is geo and mobile with Foursquare, Latitude, GoWalla, Twitter added geolocation, Facebook implemented places. So geo and mobile was one of the big themes for this year in social networking. In terms of APIs, it was GPS APIs in phone, where you can have access from the native platform or from HTML5 with the W3C geolocation API in JavaScript. And then another big theme was social gaming, with companies like Zynga becoming very successful. And when I say Zynga, also when we talk about Brazil, Vostu or Mentes, pretty popular on OAuth. And then monetization and virtual currencies, and we're going to talk about that with Jumb. So that's kind of my version of the history, recent quick history of social networking. Now, in terms of Google social products, the historical and still very strong social products by Google is OAuth. Then we had Google Friend Connect, Google Buzz, Google Web Elements, and more recently, social search. So I'll go quickly about Google Buzz, which is integrated with Gmail, and it's just a new way of doing conversations. So the whole idea about Buzz is that it's based on the notion of an activity stream, but your stream is not limited to 140 character. You can put some rich content in there. You can attach images and movies and stuff like that. But also, there's a conversation in there. So people can reply in Buzz. And like for people who use it, there are some rich conversations that are happening in this media. And some of us at Google, like DeWitt, for example, is using it as a blog. Like he has really long entries and people are commenting in there. It's pretty powerful. Google Web Elements is another, it's one of the Ajax APIs. Google Web Elements are, it's a system where you log in and then you say, I'm a site owner, but I'm not technical at all, and I want to add a little bit of Google to my site. And so you choose whether you want to add a calendar or a map. You customize it into a UI designer, and then we give you a snippet of JavaScript to put to your site. I add this to the list of social products because there's this conversation widget, which is very social, that allows you to add a conversation widget to your website where the conversation actually can happen on several websites at the same time. So if you have a network of blogs, for example, that talk about the same topic, you can have the same thread on several blogs. And plus, it's all translated, so you can translate the whole thing. For example, if you have Chinese speakers in there, you can say, I want to see the whole thing in Brazilian Portuguese. So it's pretty cool. And it's very easy to use. Usages of social networking. So you have large companies, like consumer companies like Nike, who created Nike Plus. So they create social networks that are focused around their brand or product. So in Nike Plus, you can share your activity when you're running and all that with your friends, and then you can talk about the Nike products and all that. People are using it for outwards communication, like what Best Buy did with 12Force. When you're twittering about an experience you had at Best Buy with products you bought there or something like that, some representative from Best Buy from your area can answer in there, and they have an internal application that they use to tweet there to verify that these guys are indeed Best Buy buyers, Best Buy representatives. Then you have things like social work, which is social networking, but inside the enterprise. So social work is some kind of Twitter for the enterprise. It's integrated in the apps marketplace with Google Docs and Google Apps. And it's running on App Engine, and it's using GWT. It's like they're our poster child for, they're using pretty much everything we're doing there. And then one trend that personally I thought would develop in 2008, but only starting to develop now, is social networking in the enterprise. So you have companies like Oracle, SAP, and IBM who are starting to build offerings for the enterprise. Cisco also recently outlined a product for social in the enterprise. The pioneers in there were Exo Platforms and Atlassian, who had implemented OpenSocial 2 years ago already. Okay, the technologies. So there are, I'd say there are two approaches to social networking technologies. On one side, you have Facebook, who has the Facebook platform, which was like they're going on their own and they don't want to collaborate on standards. And that was like 2 years ago. Now, since 2 years, they start to open up a little bit. Like they start to reuse existing standards like OpenID and OAuth and activity streams. They were the first one to implement it. And then there's the open way, which is what Google is trying to do, trying to leverage existing standards or create new standards when a need arises. And the goal of these is to have very narrow standards that just solve one particular aspect of the problem. And then you assemble all these together. You have open source implementations for all of these, and then you ensure that there's a vibrant ecosystem around these technologies. So the standards we're talking about is OpenID, Atom, PubSubHub, ActivityStream, OAuth, WebFinger, and Salman. So I'll start with OpenSocial, which is the oldest one. That's what you're using to develop apps on Orkut today, but also on 20 other social networks in the world. OpenSocial is a very simple API. It's an API in JavaScript, and there's a REST version of it that allows you to, when you're building your application, to have access to the social graph of the user and to send things to their activity stream. And to read their profile as well. It's been very successful. It has a global reach. Tons of social networks have implemented it, and it's very popular on Orkut. So this is an example. I just went to the Orkut list of applications and found these ones. Mini Fazenda and Coheta Feliz by Vostu and Mentes. These apps have like 16 million and 21 million users. It's pretty impressive. So there are some people who make money with it already. So let's talk about the open standards. Yeah, so that's... okay, so at Google, we're doing lots of open source. Open source was part of the Google culture even before we started doing APIs. So what you get from open source is freedom and a community. And then open standards, the goal of open standards is to have interoperability between different implementations and different websites. And it simplifies development. For the developer, instead of having to develop for 20 different platforms, they just develop to the standard and that's it. And then everybody does the same thing on the server side. So one of the first standard is OAuth. OAuth is all about authorization. It's about distributed authorization. So the way the process works is that you have a service provider, let's say, for example, Google Buzz or Google Calendar, and then you have your application who wants to access the calendar or the Buzz feed of the user. So your application needs, when your application needs to have access to that feed, the application just goes to the feed, and then they receive an unauthorized request token to say you're not authorized to use that. You need the user to authorize you to do that. So then what happens is that the user is redirected to the service provider, to Google in this case, and in the redirection there's a parameter that gives the URL where the user should be redirected to your app at the end. And so you're going through that process with the service provider, and I'm sure it may have happened to you where you're using an application, you're redirected to Google, you log in, and then Google asks you, do you want this application to have access to your calendar or to your Buzz feed? And you say yes. And then when you say yes, you are redirected back to the application, and with this redirection, there's a token that is given to the application. With that token, they can now make requests on your behalf from the API. And the way OAuth, the reason OAuth was designed is because the way people were doing that before were, do you want to invite your friends on Gmail? Okay, give me your Gmail password. And when you were doing that, basically you were giving them access to all your Google services because it's your same password for Gmail and Calendar and Google Checkout and all that. So now with OAuth, you can be very specific. You can say, I want to give that application just read access to my calendar, and that other application is going to have write access. And when I'm not using the application anymore, you can go in your settings in Google and say, I want to revoke this token, and then the application won't be able to do the request anymore. So that's what OAuth is doing. So they get an authorized token, and then they can access your feed or your data. So that's what. So OAuth is just solving the authorization piece of the puzzle. Another technology, OpenID, allows login in a standard way. Then there's another piece of the puzzle which is called the Atom Publishing Protocol and the Atom feed format. It's kind of a standardization at the IETF of RSS. They took the kind of the RSS mess of tags and different specs. I think there's something like 12 different RSS versions. So a few years ago, some guys got together at the IETF and they standardized it in the name of Atom. And so Atom defines the format for feeds. It's kind of an envelope format. And so here you have things like the author of the feed, OpenSearch is integrated in there, and you have entries which have dates and titles and stuff like that. So Atom is a very simple format to implement. Now, where it gets interesting is that inside of Atom you can put some namespaced XML data that is specific to a specific service. And so Google is using Atom in all its APIs. When you're accessing the Calendar API or the Picasa API, all you access to is Atom feeds with namespaces that are specific to each service. So for example, in a calendar feed, you'll have a namespace that will describe calendar entries. In a Picasa, you'll have a namespace that describes images. So that's Atom for feeds. Then PubSubHub. One of the problems, there's a hilarious video with Brett Slatskin and Brad Fitzpatrick that explains really well what PubSubHub is about. In a nutshell, and I think I have only 15 minutes left. Yeah, so I have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go real fast on this one. PubSubHub, what it addresses is the problem where when you're dealing with feeds, you have the client who's asking the server all the time, do you have anything new for me? Do you have anything new for me? And that is not efficient, and that generates lots of useless traffic. And so a more efficient way to do that is to have a publish-subscribe architecture. But because it's all distributed, it's important to have hubs in the middle. So that's what PubSubHub is doing. Basically, when you have a subscriber, so a publisher's feed has a link to a hub where they're going to publish their feed. And so when a subscriber asks for a feed, the publisher tells him, hey, the feed, you can get it into that hub. And so then the subscriber asks the hub, hey, I want to subscribe to that feed. And then there's a little bit of a handshake to say, are you really not a spammer? And the guy says, yeah, I really want the updates on that feed. I'm not a DOS attacker. And then what happens is that when the publisher has some new stuff, he's pinging the hub to say, hey, I have some new stuff. And then the hub pulls the updates. And then pushes them to the subscriber. And these can be many subscribers. So instead of having all the subscribers pull on the publisher all the time and on all the publishers, here you have hubs in the middle where the publisher is pushing to the hub only once when there's some new stuff, and then the hub is pushing to everybody only when there is some new stuff as well. And it's a distributed system, so there will be many hubs and many publishers and subscribers. Salman is another protocol. The problem is trying to solve is there are lots of commenting systems out there, and when you're having a blog and you're using a distributed comment system, you can comment on something on Twitter, and then you end up commenting about the same stuff on Buzz, and then maybe the conversation ends up in FriendFeed, and if you start to use many of these systems, the conversation is completely fragmented. Salman is trying to solve that by having this notion of source and aggregators, where a source is using PubSubHub to warn an aggregator that they have a new entry. The aggregator is publishing it, and when the aggregator gets new comments, it pushes them to the source. And so the source can publish it into his own thread. And then when the source has new comments, it can use PubSubHub to push it to all the aggregators that have registered for this entry. And then they will republish it into their own threads. That means that you can start a conversation, let's say on Buzz, continue it on Twitter, have a comment in WordPress, and all that stuff can go together into a single thread, or actually each system could have the whole commenting story. That's the story behind Salman. Activity streams. So as I told you, the whole social web is recentering around the activity streams. Activity streams is the standard for interoperating with these feeds. And basically, it just defines the schema on top of Atom, like a specific namespace, to define a few things about a stream of updates, so that in the user interface of the activity stream, you can make things nicer. So what it defines is an actor, a verb, and an object. So for example, Timothy is posting a note, or Barack Obama started following Timothy, or stuff like that. So an activity stream is just a list of these subject, yeah. Okay. So I'll be really short on the Buzz API, because if you have any more questions, you can find some great slides online, and I'll publish these as well. Basically, the Buzz API, so Buzz is this Google product that allows you to have conversations in a very easy way on the web. And the API is all based on all these standards. So you use OAuth to have access to it. And then you use PubSubHub to have access to the, like the, how is it called? The Firehose feed, like the whole feed on Buzz. The feed itself is in the Atom Publishing Protocol format. You can ask for a JSON version of it. And it's all follow the activity stream spec. And so I'll skip pretty quickly. I'll just show you what that looks like in the feed. So that's what it looks like for the activity stream. You have actor, name, blah, 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 profile URL. The verb is post, and the object here is a note and all that. So we don't implement the whole activity stream spec in Buzz. I think there's only a few. So these are the verbs, objects that are available in the activity stream spec. Now in Buzz we implement post, and for article, note, photo, photo album, or video. So these are the objects that are supported by Buzz. Okay, so I'll just skip through that. There's a whole lot of links to code and all that. But I'll skip to the OAuth part, which I think is more relevant here. And there's lots of code out there that helps you play with the Buzz API. Okay. Just one last note. We talked about open standards. Now, another important part of open standard is open source implementation of them. So you have status.net, which is like some kind of white label Twitter implementation, but it's open source, so you can run your own version of it. And it's implementing most of these standards. Then you have Shindig, which is the open source implementation of, it's an Apache project, it's an open source implementation of OpenSocial server. Social Site, which is another Apache project, which is a whole social network on top of Shindig that implements OpenSocial. And then PubSubHub, which is the server implementation for a PubSubHub hub, which is written in, you need to train a lot to be able to say that. And it's implemented in Python, it's running on App Engine, it's lovely. Now let's talk about Jumb, because all this stuff is good and fun and all that, but at the end of the day, we developers, we need to make money. So one good way of monetizing your social applications, especially on OAuth, is building virtual currencies of having a payment system. But building that takes a lot of time and it's pretty painful. And so there's a company called Jumb who created such a system where you can create your own virtual currency, white label virtual currency, and they manage all of it for you. And so that company has been acquired by Google in August 2010. I was very happy about that. I heard about it in the media, but I had met one of the founders before, because he used to be the guy who designed the Amazon Payment API, which I found very well designed. And so in Jumb, he just did the same kind of APIs, but for social networking. And so they're the leading leader in virtual economy monetization platform. And their platform is called Social Gold. And it allows for micropayments, subscriptions. You can create your own virtual currency, and they do inventory management for you. They have a pretty powerful analytics and reporting platform, and they do fraud management as well. So basically, it makes it very easy for you to create a virtual currency or have payment inside of your social application or games. And that kind of stuff is very fashionable these days, and it's a very good way of monetizing these apps. So what has been announced today that Jumb is available on OAuth right now. And it starts today, so just get signed up. And the key features for OAuth are support for Bolto Bankario, which seems to be a Brazilian payment method. I hadn't heard about it, but it seems it's... I'm living in San Francisco, but I'm told it's very popular in Brazil. The experience is completely localized in Portuguese. The fee for using it is 10%. And then there's 24/7 customer support for it. So in terms of features, you have a seamless in-app experience. The wallet that you created is associated with the user ID in OAuth. And you can use a wide array of payment methods. So you can see all of them here, including the Bolto Bankario. The transaction can happen in... So lots of these games are built in Flash. You can make these transactions directly in Flash. You can pause the game just when you're doing the transaction. And they don't need to leave the game in order to purchase more stuff. You have a subscription offering in there and it's completely configurable, so you can have free and discounted trials, weekly, monthly, or annual billing cycles, and you can customize the CSS for the subscription page. And then you have some APIs to have access in your game on your backend to the user status in terms of payment or in terms of subscription. Local currencies, they are live with 25 currencies. And when you get into the system, your default currency is based on the IP address that you're coming from. Now, one of the very popular things that happened in social networking in the past 2 years is the rise of virtual currencies. So you're in your game and you need to buy some stuff in that game, and then you can buy this virtual currency with real money. So building that virtual currency is a lot of work. Jumb just does it for you. So they have a very simple API that lets you build your own white label virtual currency. So you can name it, you set the exchange rate, you determine the events in which people earn money or not, and you can manage all the credit, debits, and the balance. Analytics. So Jumb provides you lots of analytics about your virtual currency. That is very useful to tune it and tune your game or your app for it. And you can sign up today. So you sign up on jumble.com. The API is very easy to use, and it's a great way to monetize your social apps. Hey, I think I'm done within time for once. So you can find again the agenda to rate the sessions at this URL. And since I have time, maybe I have time for a few questions. Okay, thanks very much.